Good afternoon or good evening or whatever it is where you ever happen to be. I am Dr. Jackie Giuliano and welcome to Speed Reading for Life, an online speed reading program based on a decade and a half of in-class experiences. I've tried to create the best online experience possible to bring the amazing speed reading skills into your life, and that's what we're going to do with this program. I want to spend some time setting this up and sharing with you some perspectives I have about why this program is important before we get going. First off, you should have a few tools of the trade with you. Hopefully you got a notebook with you and a comfortable pen. You're going to be taking notes along the way. You should always be taking notes about things that matter to you and things that make sense and resonate with your way of thinking. So make sure you have a notebook and a pen handy. And you'll be able to access this class 24/7 anytime you want. You're also welcome to visit readfast.org, which is the main website for the speed reading program of the Center for Lifelong Learning that I run. There you'll find all sorts of information. You'll also find tools for speed readers, of which you're becoming, practice tools that I'll talk about more as this presentation continues. All right, let's get going. If you got your notebook and pen handy, sitting in a comfortable spot, got your tools ready, then let's begin. All right, let's start out by talking. There is a need for a speed reading program. And you've all experienced all sorts of symptoms, I'll bet, while you read. And think about for a moment your average reading experience that you have and what sort of things don't serve you. And I'll bet you they're on this list. A lot of people, while they read, they sleep. I know somebody who has kept a book by the bed for the last 25 years. In fact, it's the same book. And she picks it up every night and takes a look at it and falls right to sleep. That's not the way it's supposed to work. People lose their place while they read. They forget what they read right after they read it. And then reading becomes a frustrating experience. And since all of your learning, whether it be at school, at home, or in the workplace, is pretty much tied to reading, if you're not a very good reader, then most people conclude that they're not a very good learner and basically not fit for school. And this is an erroneous conclusion to draw. The problem isn't with you and your brain. There's nothing wrong with you. Your brain is nimble and agile and able to learn new things all the time. The problem is that people were not taught to read in a way that supports the true design of your brain. Millions of people around the world are taught to read in a way that does not match the design of our brains. Not at all. And you'll see as this course unfolds, there's very specific reasons for that. So whether you were a good student or a poor one, it doesn't matter. Anyone can learn this process and become a super learner. So right now, I'd just like you to think for a moment about the journey you've had in your life as a learner. Did you do great in school, but it was hard and a struggle, and you worked super hard and you made all sorts of sacrifices, but you got through, and maybe you did a great job, but it wasn't a lot of fun. Or maybe your time in school was not very pleasant at all. You didn't enjoy reading. You just couldn't quite get what the teacher was getting at. The chapters seemed impossible. And you decided that school wasn't for you. You took another path. Wherever you stand in this spectrum, it doesn't matter. You can learn an entirely new way to read and decide for yourself what kind of learner you want to become. It doesn't matter if you're 8 years old or 80 years old. The process is the same. I also like to mention that I've taught this class in so many different environments, group settings for the general public, school settings, also in business settings. But one of the more interesting ways I've taught this program have been to executives, people that hire me to just teach them over the course of a couple of days. 2 quick 3-hour sessions to these busy people. I've taught some people that everybody in the world knows who they are, and I can't tell you who they are because the trainers of these people sign non-disclosure agreements because they don't want people to know who trains them, and they don't want people to use their names in promoting their business, and I understand that. And I tell you this not to show off, but because something very important happens when I teach these kinds of people. They never complain. They never talk about how hard it is. All they say is, gimme, gimme, gimme these new skills, and then you can leave. They have a mindset that just does not include the possibility of failure. And I like to call it the unstoppable will to succeed. It has nothing to do with how wealthy they are. That's the first assumption you might make. But rather, it's a mindset. Sure, there are times when things you decide to do don't work, but they just pick themselves up, figure out what happened, and then start something new. How can you get such a mindset? By deciding right now, right in this moment, that you have it. Take a moment, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and just say to yourself, I too have an unstoppable will to succeed. Anything I do, I can accomplish. Anything I try, I can succeed. If I fail, I'll figure out why and start it again. In that way, there is nothing that can stand in your way. There are no obstacles that could ever get in your way. Very important. Take on that unstoppable will to succeed right now. And then no matter how hard this speed reading program feels at times, or how weird and how different, it doesn't matter, because you can accomplish anything you want. And I'll be coming back to this theme more and more because it's so very important to not have a mindset that's anything other than true, solid belief in yourself. And we'll be talking more about this in the slides to come. Let me tell you a little bit about how the class is laid out. You can see in the course curriculum all the lectures and all the different titles, but I'm going to just tell you from a very high level how the class is organized. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little more about the issues that people have with reading to make sure that's all very clear, and you'll be able to relate to that because you're experiencing these things yourself. Then I want to spend a few minutes talking about where this speed reading idea comes from. It's a very interesting story, and I think it's very important when you're learning anything new to know why you're learning it that way. Not just do things because you're being told to do them, but to understand the origins and the sources of. Then we'll get into the speed reading techniques themselves. There's 4 basic techniques I'm going to show you. It's no one thing that's going to transform the way that you read and learn. It's a suite of tools, really. And we'll go through those one by one, and you'll practice them along the way. And they're not very complicated, but they're going to seem really strange at first. They're going to seem very odd. And the reason for that is quite simple. You've been reading the way you've been reading for, in some cases, decades, depending on your age. You've been doing it that way for so long, more than just something you do. It's become psychological conditioning. It feels like it's in your bones. It's like breathing, but it's not. It's just that you've done the same thing for so long. And adding to this conditioning, I think, is a very important fact. During your early schooling, kindergarten, first, second, third grade, is when you learned how to read. And by second and third grade, the way you read is pretty much locked in. Now, every other subject gets changed every year of school. You learn new ways of doing things. You learn new information. But nobody ever changes the way that you read. Nobody tells you to read certain things in a different way. So to a young person growing up, your thought is probably that, well, this must just be the way you read. It's the only way to read. And so that you get this false impression that that's the only way to do it. And then you do it that way repetitively for year after year after year. So it's become psychological conditioning. Because of that, I've had to build a number of things into this program that take care of that give you ways of overcoming conditioning, because the way you read now has become more like a habit. So we'll talk more about that in a little while. But it's very important to realize that the difficulty of this lies only in your mind. At times it's going to feel like this is hard and this is very strange. but it's only because you've been doing it this other way for so long. And I'm going to show you very schematically a way to overcome that resistance and that conditioning. So just be patient and know that it can be and will be overcome. All right. Then we're going to talk about a new way of taking notes. The way you take notes now doesn't work all the time, does it? You probably go A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, make lists, that kind of thing. And it doesn't always work. I'm sure there have been times during a lecture that you've attended where you've taken notes either in school or outside of school. And you're listening and taking notes for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then the lecturer says something that totally relates back to something they talked about half an hour earlier. But that thought is now on page 2 or 3 of your notes and disconnected from the initial thought on page 1. And this starts to happen throughout the entire talk, especially for lecturers who are not very organized. And next thing you know, you have a pretty incomprehensible collection of notes. Also, people take too many notes. You're writing like crazy. You're trying to transcribe the lecture. And that's not really what notes are for. So we're going to talk specifically, we're going to have a lecture later on about note-taking. But I'm going to show you a way of taking notes, whether it's a 500-page book or a 5-hour lecture, all on one page. It's fantastic, and you're going to really enjoy it. Once we finish up time and take all the pieces of the speed reading process we've talked about, and I'm going to put them together in a process that you'll be able to reproduce and practice. And I call this process the triple reading process for a very important reason. I want to tell you right now to get you thinking about it. Instead of going through the book once and assuming that you're going to remember it, which you don't, you're going to go through it 3 times, at least 3, maybe more. Now, this is going to sound crazy to you at first because you already read slowly, and now I'm telling you to spend 3 times as much time in the book, but it's not going to be the same way you read now. It's going to be very different. Let me tell you basically what it's going to look like. The first pass through the book, you're going to go through really fast, flipping through pages every couple of seconds, and it's amazing how much you can pick up doing that. Then you're going to go back to the beginning, and you're going to go through it again slower, with a very intentional process I'm going to give you. And then you're going to go through a 3rd time, even slower. And what's going to happen here is that the meaning on those pages is going to start building up organically. The first pass, you get a big picture. The second pass, it's starting to get clearer. The 3rd pass, you get more. You go back through again if you need to. This is very natural way of learning. Your brain loves this. At first, it seems odd, but you warm up to it and your brain starts to really enjoy it. And I'll say much more about that later. Then we'll customize this process. There's different ways of doing it for different kinds of books. There's different reasons for reading things, different ways of reading different kinds of things. And we'll talk about all that. And then we'll practice it, and I will give you a practice plan which will take you into the future.